In 1905, the Royal Navy had more battleships in commission than the next two navies in the world put together. That was not a boast, it was policy. The two-power standard, set out in Parliament in 1889, held that British naval strength should at least equal the strength of any two other countries combined, and for 16 years Britain had built to it. It had the yards, the money, the coal, the crews, and the hulls. On the 2nd of October, 1905, at His Majesty's Dockyard, Portsmouth, on a slipway screened off from anyone who might be inclined to look, the Admiralty laid the keel of a ship that made every one of those hulls worthless. She carried 10 12-inch guns and nothing else worth counting. She displaced 18,120 tons at normal load. She was the first capital ship in the world driven by steam turbines, and on trial she made 21.5 knots on the measured mile. Her name was Dreadnought, the 6th ship of the Royal Navy to carry it, and her motto was "Fear God and Dread Naught." Within a year, every battleship afloat had been demoted into a category that did not exist before she did. They became pre-dreadnoughts, not obsolete in the sense that they could no longer float or fight. Obsolete in the sense that mattered to an admiralty, which is that they could no longer be counted. Britain's enormous lead was a lead in ships that no longer counted. The Navy, with more to lose than anyone else, built the thing that took it away, deliberately, and then hurried. They built her in a year and a day. Subscribe, because the 4 other ships ordered in the same year as Dreadnought are the part almost nobody tells. Because the naval estimates of 1905 to 1906 did not order 1 armored ship, they ordered 5, 1 battleship and 4 armored cruisers. And the man who forced Dreadnought through in a year and a day wanted those 4 far more than he wanted her. He never got them. The reason he never got them is the year and a day. Somewhere in the timbers of victory, still sitting in dry dock at Portsmouth, there is work done by the great-grandfather of the man who designed the Dreadnought. Philip Watts was born on the 30th of May, 1846, at Deptford in Kent, into a family that had been building warships for the Crown for 4 generations. His father, John, was a master shipwright of Havelock Park in Southsea. So was his grandfather. So was his great-grandfather, who worked on Victory. His mother was Mary Ann Featherstone. In 1860, at 14, he was apprenticed as a shipwright in the Royal Dockyard at Portsmouth, which is to say he began where his family had always begun, with a mallet and a chisel and a piece of oak. He was noticed quickly. In 1866, the Admiralty sent him to the Royal School of Naval Architecture and Marine Engineering at South Kensington. He left in April 1870 with the title of Fellow, and at 26 he was sent to Pembroke Dockyard as assistant constructor on the armored cruiser Shannon. Follow the hands, apprentice at 14, mathematics at 20, someone else's drawings at 26. Then, in 1885, he left the Admiralty and went north to Armstrong, Whitworth and Company at Elswick on the Tyne as head of their warship department. He stayed 16 years. Elswick built for anybody who could pay. Watts designed cruisers and battleships for foreign navies, and most of the Japanese battleships that destroyed the Russian fleet in 1904 and 1905 came off his boards, including the fast Yashima, mined off Port Arthur and lost. Hold that against what came next. The man who designed the ship that made every navy on Earth obsolete had spent 17 years selling ships to those navies. He knew exactly what the rest of the world had, because he had drawn a good deal of it himself. He came back to the Admiralty in February 1902, and he came back into a chair that had just been broken. Sir William Henry White was born at Devonport on the 2nd of February, 1845, and apprenticed in the dockyard there at 14. In 1863, he won an Admiralty scholarship, sat the first entrance examination for the school at South Kensington, and came first. He became Director of Naval Construction on the 1st of August, 1885, and over the next 17 years, he was responsible for 43 battleships, 26 armored cruisers, and something like 170 other warships. He designed the Royal Sovereign class, which for a decade was the standard by which every battleship in the world was measured. He was destroyed by a yacht. Victoria and Albert, the 3rd royal yacht of that name, was launched at Pembroke Dockyard on the 9th of May, 1899. During fitting out, a great deal of weight went into her high up, including a large quantity of cement laid in as soundproofing around the royal apartments. On the 3rd of July, 1900, she was floated out of the graving dock and began to lie over. Here is what had happened in plain terms. A ship resists being leaned over, and the strength of that resistance can be measured. The measurement is called metacentric height. Victoria and Albert was designed with about 2 feet of it, which is an argument the ship wins comfortably. By the time she came out of the dock, she had roughly 700 tons of extra weight above her center of gravity and 3 inches. She did not capsize. She was saved, ballasted and rebuilt, and served 4 sovereigns. But it reached Parliament, and the Admiralty investigated its own Director of Naval Construction and produced a document that cleared him of direct responsibility and blamed him anyway for failing to press on his subordinates how novel the work was. White had a nervous breakdown in 1901 and retired on health grounds in 1902. He did not go quietly, and that matters later. He recovered, and in April 1906, in the 19th century, he published a long article on the new naval estimates, arguing that the advertised cost of the Dreadnought was a serious understatement because a great deal of her had been paid for out of earlier years' accounts. Fisher had a name for men like White. He called them the Syndicate of Discontent. Watts took the chair on the 1st of February 1902. 2 years and 8 months later, on the 20th of October 1904, Trafalgar Day, a 63-year-old admiral walked into the Admiralty as First Sea Lord, with the specification already written in his head. John Arbuthnot Fisher had joined the Royal Navy in 1854 at 13. He had served in China and in Egypt, where he commanded the battleship Inflexible, the dreadnought of her own day. He made Rear Admiral in 1890 and commanded in the Mediterranean from 1900 to 1902. He was a gunnery man, an enthusiast, a bully, and by common consent, the most effective political operator the Royal Navy has ever produced. Within weeks of arriving, he pushed a decision through the board. The next battleship would carry 12-inch guns and nothing smaller worth the name, and she would make no less than 21 knots. In January 1905, he convened the Committee on Designs to evaluate the proposals and do the detailed work. He appointed every member personally. He was its president. It was called independent, and it was not. It had no authority to consider anything the board had not already settled. The evidence was fresh, and it was foreign. In the Yellow Sea in 1904, Russian and Japanese battleships had opened fire at 14,000 yards, a range nobody had ever fought at. At Tsushima, Captain William Pakenham reported that 12-inch fire announced itself unmistakably while 10-inch shells passed almost unnoticed. And Togo crossed the Russian T, which he could do because his ships were faster. Now read the requirement again. 12-inch guns and 21 knots is not a request for a stronger battleship. Speed in a battle line is not for running away, and it is not for chasing. Speed is for choosing the range. A ship 2 knots faster decides how far apart the fleets will be, and a ship that decides the range and carries only heavy guns has arranged a fight the other man's guns cannot reach. The hard part was the machinery. On the 18th of January 1905, the committee chose steam turbines over reciprocating engines, which saved about 1,100 tons of displacement outright. Nobody had ever put turbines in a capital ship. The case for them rested on Charles Parsons gate-crashing the Diamond Jubilee Review at Spithead in 1897 in a small yacht called Turbinia and running through the assembled fleet at something like 34 knots, and on 2 destroyers, Viper and Cobra, both of which had since been lost. The committee rejected super-firing turrets, one firing over another, because turrets were then aimed through sighting hoods on their roofs, and nobody wished to find out what a 12-inch muzzle blast did to a man's eye at 4 feet. It broke up on the 22nd of February and reported in March, having added longitudinal bulkheads to protect the magazines, on the evidence that the Russian battleship Cesarevich had survived a torpedo because of her internal subdivision. The weight was found by taking an inch off the belt. 7 hull forms were tested in the Admiralty tank at Gosport before one was chosen. 3 assistant constructors and 13 draftsmen drew her. The men who lost are worth naming. Vittorio Cuniberti, an Italian naval engineer, had published the whole idea in Jane's Fighting Ships in 1903, an ideal battleship for the British fleet. 17,000 tons, a dozen 12-inch guns, 24 knots. He published it in a British annual because the Italian Navy would not build it. And Japan laid down the battleship Satsuma as an all-big gun ship 5 months before Dreadnought, then completed her with 4 of the 12 heavy guns intended, because the guns did not exist. Then the board did something remarkable. It decided to order no further battleships at all until this one had been built and run her trials. The construction program of the largest navy on Earth now waited on a single hull on a single slipway. Take her apart decision by decision, and every one of them is a trade. 10 guns in 5 twin turrets, 3 of them A, X, and Y sat on the center line, forward and aft. The other 2, P and Q, sat out on the wings, port and starboard of the forward superstructure, which means that of the 10 guns she carried, 8 would bear on a broadside. 6 could fire aft, 4 could fire forward. She carried 2 heavy guns and their turrets, their barbettes, their armor, and their magazines everywhere she went, for the sake of the few engagements in which they would speak. That was the price of refusing to stack turrets. It is worth stopping to explain why this mattered, because the all-big gun ship is usually presented as though bigger guns were simply better, and that is not the argument. Here is how you hit something at 7 miles in 1905. You cannot see the fall of your shell against the target. What you can see is water. A shell that misses throws up a column of spray, and by watching where those columns land relative to the enemy, over and short, left and right, you correct and fire again. You are not aiming, you are converging. So you fire your guns together in a salvo, and you read the pattern of splashes. Now put a mixed battery on that ship. 12-inch guns, 9.2-inch guns, 6-inch guns, all firing at long range. They all throw up water. At 7 miles through smoke, you cannot reliably tell which column came from which gun. So the pattern you are reading is not a pattern, it is noise. And your correction is a guess. You have 2 options. Silence the smaller guns and waste their rate of fire, or keep firing them and lose your ranging. That is the whole case. 1 caliber means 1 pattern. 1 pattern means you can read the water. The technical name for the solution is uniform main armament. The machinery, 2 paired sets of direct drive turbines on 4 shafts, steam from 18 Babcock and Wilcox boilers, rated at 23,000 shaft horsepower. On her 8-hour full-power trial off Polperro on the 9th of October, 1906, she produced 27,018 and 21.6 knots. She carried 2,868 tons of coal and 1,120 tons of fuel oil, which was sprayed onto the coal to make it burn faster. The armor, an 11-inch belt at the waterline, and it was 11 inches rather than 12, because an inch had been sold to buy the magazine bulkheads. There is a harder cost in the same scheme. The top of that belt sat 2 feet above the water at normal load, and at deep load, it was more than a foot under. A specialist would call that wrong. It was right for a ship meant to fight at long range, where shells arrive falling rather than flat, and wrong on any day the enemy closed. Some trades simply failed. She was given 27 12-pounder guns against torpedo boats, and 8 of them were meant to be lifted off their mountings every morning and stowed on chocks, so the main guns would not blow them apart. Gun trials in December 1906 established that this was harder than it had sounded in a committee room. By the end of 1907, she had 24, and 1 decision was never repaired. Her foremast was stepped behind the forward funnel, which put the spotting top, where the gunnery officer stood and read the water, directly in the funnel gases. It was recognized as a defect. It was never fixed in her lifetime. Even the accommodation was a trade. Officers had always berthed aft. In Dreadnought, they were moved forward, closer to their action stations, and they detested it because the turbines had made the stern quiet for the first time in the history of steam. While forward, they now slept beside the auxiliary machinery. Now the story everyone tells about why she was built so fast, which is that her guns and turrets were taken from the Lord Nelson class then under construction. It is a good story, and it is entirely believable. The 2 classes were building at the same time, the mountings were similar, the Lord Nelsons were unaccountably late, and the arithmetic is tempting. It is also not borne out by the record. Her guns and turrets were not ordered until July 1905. What appears to have happened is duller. Dreadnought's mountings were given priority, and somebody else waited. Which brings us back to a year and a day, and what a year and a day actually cost. The work started in May 1905, 5 months before the keel was laid. and roughly 6,000 man-weeks of prefabrication went into her before there was officially a ship. The internal structure was simplified wherever it could be, and the plating standardized so that plates differed in thickness and not in shape. Number 5 slip was screened. 1,100 men were at work the day she was laid down, and the number rose to 3,000. On other ships, they had worked a 48-hour week. On Dreadnought, they worked 69 hours over 6 days, 6 in the morning to 6 at night, 30 minutes for lunch. On day 6, the first bulkheads were in. By day 55, all the upper deck beams were in place. On day 125, the 4th of February, 1906, the hull was finished. 6 days later, King Edward VII launched her with a bottle of Australian sparkling wine that took several blows to break. She was commissioned in December 1906, and the sources disagree on the day, some giving the 2nd and some the 11th. Either way, it was about 15 months from keel to fleet, at a cost recorded variously as £1,672,000 or £1,785,000. Which tells you something about how the books were kept. The question was, what would happen when the idea left Portsmouth? It did not take long to find out. In December 1906, she went south for trials to Gibraltar, then across the Atlantic to Port of Spain in Trinidad, and home to Portsmouth on the 23rd of March, 1907. She averaged 17 knots on the way out and 19 on the way back, sustained speeds no battleship had ever kept up. Captain Reginald Bacon, who had sat on the design committee, reported that nobody on it had dared hope every innovation would work as well as it had. The copying began immediately, and the most instructive copy is the German one. The 4 ships of the Nassau class were laid down in the middle of 1907 at Vulcan in Stettin, at Weser in Bremen, at Germania Werft in Kiel, and at the Imperial Yard in Wilhelmshaven, and completed in 1910 at around 37 million marks apiece. 12 11-inch guns in 6 twin turrets in a hexagon, which meant that, like Dreadnought, they fired 8 on a broadside while carrying 12. They kept triple expansion engines and made 19 to 20 knots. They were beamier and better subdivided. The Nassau design, in fact, traces back to 1903, and there is a serious argument that it answered the Lord Nelson class rather than Dreadnought at all. Here is the detail that only somebody who has looked at a map would carry. German capital ship size was not set by German doctrine. It was set by masonry. The Kaiser Wilhelm Canal, which let the fleet move between the Baltic and the North Sea without going round Denmark, and the locks at Wilhelmshaven, capped German ships at roughly 16,000 tons and a beam of 23.2 meters. Nassau's beam was 26.9. So from 1907, Germany began digging, widening and deepening the canal and building new locks at a cost estimated at 223 million marks, more than the original canal had cost to build. Tirpitz took the view that Germany could not fight at sea until the work was done. The enlarged canal was formally reopened on the 24th of June 1914. Sarajevo was 4 days later. And everyone else came too. Japan, Russia, Austria, Hungary, Italy, Spain. Brazil ordered Minas Gerais from Armstrong at Elswick, setting off an arms race between Brazil, Argentina and Chile that none of them could afford. Britain built dreadnoughts at profit for navies Britain would then have to outbuild. In 1909, a panic over German acceleration produced 4 ships in the estimates and 4 more in a footnote, and a slogan that ran through the music halls: "We want 8 and we won't wait." They got 8. By 1914, Britain had something like 29 dreadnought battleships against Germany's 17, though every published count differs, because everything depends on what you agree to count. Then the thing met itself. In September 1911, Armstrong laid down at Elswick a battleship for Brazil called Rio de Janeiro, 14 12-inch guns in 7 centerline turrets. The only ship ever built that way. The Brazilian rubber trade collapsed, Brazil could not pay, and in December 1913, the Ottoman Empire bought her for £2,750,000, some of it raised by public subscription across Turkey. She was renamed Sultan Osman I. After the founder of the empire, she was complete, paid for, and her Turkish crew had arrived to collect her when, in the first days of August 1914, the the British government seized her. The sources give the 2nd, the 3rd, and the 11th. She was commissioned as the Agincourt, and at Jutland fired 144 12-inch shells and took no damage at all. The Ottoman Empire, which had paid for her, entered the war on the other side, and British soldiers went ashore at Gallipoli. Which brings us to 8. Dreadnought carried 10 guns to put 8 on a broadside. On the other side of the Atlantic, a design had been finished in June 1905 that put 8 on a broadside by carrying 8. On the 3rd of March 1905, 7 months before Dreadnought's keel was laid, the United States Congress authorized 2 new battleships, South Carolina and Michigan, and renewed the displacement limit it had imposed before, 16,000 tons. That was roughly the size of the pre-dreadnoughts they were replacing, and at least 2,000 tons less than foreign contemporaries. It was a legislature setting a warship's dimensions from a committee room, and it made the designer's job close to impossible. The designer was Rear Admiral Washington Lee Capps, chief of the Bureau of Construction and Repair. Wing turrets on a 16,000-ton hull were structurally hopeless. So Capps did the thing the British committee had refused to do. He put all 4 twin turrets on the center line and raised the 2nd and 3rd so they fired over the 1st and 4th. 8 12-inch guns carried, 8 on the broadside either side, nothing wasted. His design was finalized on the 26th of June, 1905. Give the Americans their full due here, because they earned it. That layout is the one every navy on Earth ended up using, including the Royal Navy, within a decade. The blast question that had frightened Fisher's committee was settled the way such questions should be, by experiment. In March 1907, the Monitor Florida was modified so that a 12-inch gun could be fired directly over a turret roof, and the answer was that it was survivable, and give the British ship her due back. South Carolina kept reciprocating engines and made 18.5 knots, 3 less than Dreadnought. Her guns were 12-inch 45 caliber Mark V's, carried over from earlier classes, shorter range than the British Mark 10. Against a ship that could choose the range, the better layout would not have saved her. Now locate the real difference, which is not technical at all. Congress capped the tonnage, and the cap forced elegance, because there was no weight available for anything that did not fight. The Admiralty had no cap, and it had a committee assembled specifically to agree with its president, so nobody in the room was in a position to say that 2 of the 10 guns were passengers. And then the mirror image on the calendar. The American design was done first, and the American ships were awarded to yards in 1906, laid down in December 1906, and commissioned in 1910. Britain's ship was designed second and was at sea in 15 months. America got the layout right and the clock wrong. Britain got the clock right and the layout wrong. Say plainly who paid: the crews of P and Q turrets, who spent the war in armored rooms that mostly watched, and every treasury in Europe, which spent 4 years copying an arrangement that was already second best when it was chosen, because Britain got there first, and being first is what everybody counted. Which raises the question of what the ship was actually for. Not the guns, not the turbines, the ship. And the answer had been written down 18 months before she was laid down by the man who built her. And the answer was that she should not exist. In May 1904, while still at Portsmouth, and before he had the job, Fisher circulated a paper to a private committee of 7 officers. It was called Naval Necessities. In it, he argued that the battleship's entire justification had gone. The old battleship existed because nothing could sink it except another battleship, and torpedo craft and submarines had ended that. Its one function, ultimate security, was gone. He proposed that the whole Navy be reduced to 4 types: a 21-knot battleship, a 25-knot armored cruiser, a 36-knot destroyer, and ocean-going submarines. The battleship was on that list, and he spends much of the same paper explaining that it barely deserves to be, and that the only version worth having is essentially an armored cruiser wearing a battleship's name. What he wanted was the cruiser. Fast, heavily gunned, lightly armored, able to be sent anywhere in the Empire at short notice, and able to hit at a range where thin armor did not matter. It was half of a strategy in which submarines held the narrow seas at home so the heavy ships could go and defend trade. So, the estimates of 1905 to 1906 ordered 1 battleship and 4 armored cruisers. One was later dropped, The other three became invincible, inflexible, and indomitable, and they were the first battle cruisers in the world. Now sit with what happened next, because it is the year and a day working in reverse. Dreadnought was Watts's design, done in-house, which meant she was built in a naval dockyard, which meant Portsmouth, a yard Fisher had commanded and could drive personally. Invincible came out of Armstrong's drawing office at Elswick, a private yard where he had no such grip, and where labor disputes cost her at least 3 months. So the battleship was rushed, and the cruisers were not. Indomitable, the first of the three to finish, was not available for evaluation until the autumn of 1908, 2 full years behind, which meant that in the estimates of 1906, of 1907, and of 1908, when the Admiralty had to order 4 large armored ships a year and had to say what kind, the only proven modern capital ship in existence was the one Fisher had built as a stepping stone. In January 1906, his own committee recommended that the next armored ships all be battleships of the Dreadnought type. He had appointed that committee. He could not overrule it without proving every accusation his enemies had made about how he ran the Admiralty. This is the revisionist reading, and it should be labeled as such. It comes from John Sumida, Nicholas Lambert, and Angus Ross, working from Fisher's own papers. The older account, Arthur Marder's, has Fisher simply wanting better battleships to contain Germany. Historians who have read the same archive disagree about what the man meant. What they do not disagree about is what he wrote in May 1904 and what the estimates ordered in 1905. He built her in a year and a day to get past her, and the year and a day is precisely what made her permanent. She was not the ship that made every navy obsolete. She was the ship her own creator meant to make obsolete, and she outlived his plan by a generation. Start again from the top then, with the assumption dissolved. A ship does not make navies obsolete. A ship is a lump of steel that can be counted alongside other lumps of steel. What made every navy on Earth obsolete was a timetable. It was not the 10 guns, and it was not the turbines. It was the deliberately advertised fact that Britain could conceive, draw, and commission a capital ship of a wholly new kind in 15 months, and that anyone wishing to remain a naval power would have to keep pace with that. Add up the trades. 8 guns over 10, an untried turbine over a known engine, a bulkhead over an inch of belt, a mast in the smoke, a battery designed to be carried in pieces, and a hull built by 3,000 men working 13-hour days. She never fought a battleship, not one in 13 years. On the 18th of March, 1915, in the Pentland Firth, the German submarine U-29 surfaced directly ahead of her after firing a torpedo at another ship, and Dreadnought ran her down and cut her in 2. She remains the only battleship ever confirmed to have sunk a submarine. She was refitting at Portsmouth from the 18th of April to the 22nd of June 1916 and missed Jutland. In July 1916, she was sent to Sheerness to watch the Thames alongside the pre-Dreadnoughts she had made obsolete. She paid off on the 7th of August 1918, and on the 9th of May 1921, she was sold for scrap as one of 113 ships bought at a flat rate of £2.10 a ton, later beaten down to £2.04. She reached the breakers at Inverkeithing on the 2nd of January 1923. She cost the better part of £1.75 million, and almost nothing of her survives. In the collection of the National Maritime Museum at Greenwich, there is a gun tampion from the Dreadnought. A tampion is the plug that goes in the muzzle of a gun to keep the sea out. This one is 335 millimeters across, mounted on an oak base. It carries no official badge because she was never given one. So her crew made their own and fitted it themselves. A bulldog's head, cast in brass on a beaten copper plaque, inside 2 circles of rope twist. That is what is left of the ship that was built in a year and a day.